A New York Times story about the 2020 campaign has prompted an unusually harsh denunciation from Mike Pence. The vice president called the piece, quote, disgraceful and offensive to me, my family, and our entire team. The allegations in the article are categorically false and represent just the latest attempt by the media to divide this administration. What the paper said was that the VP created a political action committee, hired a top operative, and that one of his aides said in a meeting that the Pence team wants to be prepared in case there is an opening in 2020. Joining us now here in Los Angeles, Gina Loudon, host of America Trends with Dr. Gina on the U2 America Network, and in New York, Kathy Yaru, publisher of Catalina Magazine and a former editor at the Washington Post magazine. Gina, what do you make of Mike Pence pushing back so hard in such personal terms against this New York Times piece that includes him in the maneuvering for 2020?
Well, I think, he's probably asking the question of if he were not doing those things, would the media be criticizing him for not doing them, saying maybe he's not fully on board with the conservative agenda, or just stirring enmity in some other way. I think that's the problem, is that there has become such a chasm between conservatives in general and the media at this point that there is just a distrust overall. So everything the media says is suspect to someone like Vice President Mike Pence.
Kathy, wouldn't any vice president keep his options open? What if Trump doesn't run? What if he has health problems? The story doesn't say that Mike Pence is going to challenge Trump, which would be ludicrous.
Right. The story went with facts. It wasn't, for him to say it was offensive, it wasn't offensive. It went with facts. He did start a political action committee. He is raising money. He did hire a chief of staff that is known to be a campaign guy. So his actions are showing that he may be getting ready to run for 2020, and it would be irresponsible for the New York Times to not run a story like this. So it makes sense that he's upset, but maybe it's because it's the truth.
On the other hand, Gina, let me quote from the story. Mr. Pence has made no overt efforts to separate himself from the beleaguered president. He has kept up his relentless public praise, and even in private is careful to bow to the president. But I'm told that Mike Pence was truly offended and wanted to knock this down.
Yeah, and I think just going with the presumption that this president is weak is, first of all, a lot of conservatives are going to see that as a media bias in and of itself. Some would say it would be irresponsible of the vice president not to be prepared to be president. He is, after all, the next in line. So for any vice president in history to not be prepared, some people would say that it would be irresponsible for him not to be. So then when the media tries to make a story out of this, other than just reporting it, but reporting it with a little jab, like, is there some problem there? That's what the consumers of media may have a problem with.
In fairness to the Times, Kathy, Pence wasn't even the top of the piece. It was about Tom Cotton, Ben Sasse, and John Kasich. But the Pence camp believes that such key facts were left out as a former governor, he needed a federal PAC just to pay for his travel. And at the first $1 million fundraiser for this political action committee he formed, he was introduced by Ivanka Trump. So it wasn't, that wasn't mentioned.
Well, the piece, it wasn't about him, so maybe that's why they didn't mention those things. They were saying that Republicans are coming up with a plan B for 2020, and that is the responsible thing to do, given Trump's numbers right now. They're in the 30s, so 30%. So, yes, Trump might be the only person who thinks he can win in 2020. So the New York Times is simply saying that Republicans are looking for a plan B, and Pence happens to be one of them. So if they didn't include every detail about Pence's life, it's because, as you said, the piece wasn't just about Vice President Pence. The piece, I think, was responsible and balanced.
You couldn't resist that political shot. Let me turn now to Mitch McConnell. Let me turn now to Mitch McConnell, who has been the subject of a number of attacks by various Fox News hosts. Let's take a look at one. Fox and Friends, Lou Dobbs, and here's Sean Hannity.
So, Senator McConnell, my message to you. If all you're going to do is whine like a 10-year-old and complain and make excuses and blame the president for your failure after 8 months of him now being in office, and you have in the House and Senate, guess what? It really is time to drain the sewer and swamp.
So, Gina, President Trump was asked about this, and he said, well, he's got to get repeal and replace done. What started this was the majority leader saying that Trump, with no political experience, had excessive expectations of how quickly Capitol Hill could move. But in terms of these attacks from the conservative media, is this a sign of a divide between Trump and the Hill GOP leaders?
This is about, again, the media just taking great liberties that the American public, the consumer, doesn't see the way the media sees it. The consumer, a lot of conservatives out there and a lot of the Trump base sees the media as just an enemy. And so they are discredited with them. And let's not forget the media's approval ratings are far lower than this president or Congress.
We're talking here about conservative commentators who in a normal environment would be champions of Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan, but having to sort of take sides in the fact to deal with the fact that major initiatives have failed, particularly repealing and replacing Obamacare, are now beating up on McConnell.
I think conservatives feel like they've had 7 years. Let's not forget the uprising of the Tea Party movement. Mm-hmm. That was about getting rid of establishment types like McConnell that talk a good game during campaigns and then don't deliver the goods. And I think that's maybe what conservatives were seeing as the problem. And so it was normal for conservatives to then. This is something that is interesting about conservatives, Howie, is that they will criticize their own much more readily, I think, sometimes than those on the other side of the aisle.
But on that point, Kathy, does it show that some people on the conservative side in the media, and I mentioned some of the Fox News hosts, are perhaps trying to protect President Trump by blaming it all on McConnell when you ever have a failed congressional initiative, there's a responsibility on both sides?
Right, and sometimes we forget the media is the people. The media ask the tough questions. They say what the people are thinking. And I think the Fox hosts are correct. I think one of the Fox hosts said, ditch Mitch. And I think the people are feeling that way. I think society's feeling that way. So the Fox hosts are getting it right, and they're speaking on behalf of the people, because after all, that's what the media is. The media serves the people. They are of the people. So I think the media is getting it right. I don't think they're just defending Trump.
Let me use the remaining time to come back to our lead story, the violence in Charlottesville and all the media criticism of President Trump for not calling out white nationalists by name. What do you make, Gina, of the way the media have covered this overall in terms of the dialogue that the media are starting or not starting?
I think it's sad that Trump became the topic. I think if Trump had identified people initially, the media would have immediately jumped to, why is he giving them, why is he elevating their status? Why is he giving them any attention? Because we know this is such a tiny, tiny minority of people. So I think that would have been the reaction, from the media had he done what they're now saying they wish he had done.
Is there an honest conversation going on right now in the media about this?
Is it an honest conversation? I don't think so. And I think that the thing that America misses about the media, and I think the way the media could get back into the good graces of America, is to let the conversation happen. Forget the political correctness for just 5 minutes and have a conversation. And if you want to talk about, in a tragedy like this, we should be discussing the victims. We should be discussing the heart of America right now, and not discussing what the president did or didn't say.
I agree with that part. Final thought, Kathy, on Charlottesville coverage?
Right, I do agree, and it's always tough to cover these situations. These are tough situations to cover. So let's get down to the victims. Let's get to the tough issues and talk about those things. So these are always tough topics to cover. So it's tough for the media. These are never easy for the media.
Right. I hate when the spotlight gets off of those who were injured or killed or wounded for the political sniping that always follows these things. Kathy Aru, Gina Loudon, thanks very much for joining us. After the break.